So we have the tokens table all set up in our database, and it's time to go set up the appropriate model back in the source code in our API backend. But before we do that, let's set up the foreign key relationship between this table, tokens, and the users table. And of course we do that through user ID. The user ID value in any row in the tokens table corresponds to the ID column in the users table. And fortunately, Beekeeper makes that pretty easy. So I'll click on Relations here and make sure you're looking at the tokens table. Go to Relations, this tab right here, and click the little plus sign right here. Now, Beekeeper Studio gives us a default name here, and that's fine. Don't change it. I find that if I do change it to something else, sometimes it causes me grief. So I'm going to accept that default. And we want the column in this table, which is user ID, in the schema public, to point to the users table. That's our foreign key table. And our foreign key column is ID in that table. And we have to specify our actions. So when someone updates user ID in the users table, cascade, make the same change here. And when someone deletes a user, cascade, delete any entries in the tokens table that have the corresponding user ID that matches the ID of whatever user has been deleted. And I'll just click Apply. There, that's all set up. So now let's go back to our source code. And we'll go back to our internal folder in the data folder and open up models. Okay? And now we'll set up a type, and I'll call this one token singular, struct, and we'll put its appropriate values in there. So if we go back and look in Beekeeper Studio and look at the columns, here are the ones we have to specify. ID, user ID, and email. Let's do those three. So ID, which is an int, and in JSON, I'll call that ID. Better put a T on int though. That's better. User ID, which is also an int, and in JSON, I'll call that user underscore ID. Email, which is a string, and in JSON, I'll call that email. And what's next? Back to Beekeeper. Next is token, token hash, and created at. So token, that's a string, and in JSON, I'll call that token. Then token hash, that's actually going to be a slice of bytes, because remember that's binary data. And in JSON, I'm just not going to send that, so I'll use the hyphen. Then I think we had created at and updated at. Let's go make sure. Yep, created at and updated at, so I can just copy these two from users and paste them right in here. And then we have expiry, and that's of type time.time. And that should do the import for me if necessary. And in JSON, I'll call that expiry. Okay, so let's save this. Now, I can come back up here to the user type and add a token here of type token. And in JSON, I can call that token. And if I save this, I should format it, and we're all set. So the next step is to start writing the database functions that will allow us to interact with these tables as necessary, to add a user, to authenticate a user, to generate a token, all that sort of thing. And that will take a bit of work, but none of it's that difficult. And we'll get started in the next lecture.